Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be doing another pack opening. I've got one of these bad boys to crack open today, and I'm pretty sure there's a golden booster in here, so we're going to be looking for that. I'll also be going over some tips for sealed and draft play. I've mentioned that a little bit on the channel that I want to share that with you guys, and so with the release events coming up this weekend, I want to make sure you're ready to take down those tournaments. Let's jump into the packs and we can get started with some of the first points. So, for Altered's limited play, the main two versions you have are sealed deck, where you're going to have 7 boosters, but for release events they've said that they'll also have the option for shops to do a starter deck and 3 boosters. So I feel like that'll be pretty similar because you still are opening those random packs and there are the same rules where you can use 3 colors, but it will be interesting because now you have the choice to pick a starter deck. So we'll be talking about both of those sealed formats. We'll also be discussing draft, where you would get 4 packs in Altered, pass twice to the left, twice to the right as you open them throughout a thing. So yeah, we'll be looking into those 2 formats. At first, I think I'll just start with general deck building tips, things that would apply to both of these formats. Then we'll talk about gameplay, things that will also be similar for both of those. Then at the very end, for like a third section, I'm going to be talking about things that are specific to draft. I feel like since you're picking from the same packs as your opponents, it just brings in some extra concerns or things that you want to think about that you won't really see in a sealed format where you're only picking from your packs. But yeah, let's talk about some of the general stuff first. So, looking at the deck building rules here, let me get these packs out of the way, give us a little bit cleaner view. There we go. I think that one of the most important things for Altered Sealed is finding a good hero. As for the other cards in your deck, you only draw them maybe in like half of your games, but your hero, you're going to have it every game and every day of the game. So it's definitely something where having a strong hero could really add up and just give you a lot of value throughout a tournament. So I think that from my past experience, a lot of the starter deck heroes are going to be really good just because their abilities don't have a lot of conditions you need to meet. And so I'd really be looking for something like Sigismar is probably the best because you can get that 1/1 character every day with no conditions and yeah, really put a lot of pressure on your opponent. It's super nice too if you draw like a bad hand with just spells or removals. As long as you're playing Sigismar, you'll at least have 1 character on the board, so it can like make that a little more forgiving. I think Tage is super good though too. Just getting that 1 boost will be very beneficial, and then you can use that with a lot of things like Seasoned and stuff that it's not like normally able to combo with. Things like with Gigantic, it can be really good as well. So yeah, I'd definitely be looking out for a lot of those. Even something like Akeisha can have a pretty beneficial power. Fen and Crowbar, it's pretty strong. Some of them, like Traced, they're going to be a little bit harder to activate when you don't get to have a deck specifically built for them. So I don't know if that'd be like my first pick. Some of the other heroes like Lindo and Warrior, you'd have to have a very specific draft to take either of these. So I'd probably stay away from heroes like those as well. Let's look at our first unique here for this display. Second pack. I'm Eternal, and you may discard a card from your reserve if you do resupply. At noon, draw a card. That's a pretty interesting Hydra. I do like that it isn't just giving boosts. A lot of them are pretty similar to the original, and so they feel like more of a side grade, but here, being able to get a draw every noon does seem pretty strong, and an option to resupply as well. I don't know if I'll play this often over the normal Hydra common or rare, just because those extra boosts that they can get will make it so strong to just kind of like lock down one side, but maybe in the future there will definitely be a place for this, since it does give you such a strong resource advantage over your opponent. But yeah, now that we talked about the heroes, so I said you want a strong one, but how do you go about getting that? I don't think that you need to be super worried about your hero. From what I've seen in my last draft, at the end of the like last pack or second to last pack, you're gonna get a lot of heroes passed to you because everyone will they'll have a hero already, and so they'll just pass all the extras to you. So I wouldn't be like under pressure to pick a bad hero in the middle of a draft just because you're worried you don't have one yet. I think you can definitely be patient and wait till the end. But if you do see that like really strong hero, like Sigmar, Tasia, maybe even like Hojo or something, I'd probably pick it up even early on if there's like a strong rare or something in your pack. I think I'm just going for the hero at that point, just to like make sure you have it. So I would have like a hero be like a priority pick. There we go, a unique foiler. Not bad. So now that we've talked about the strong heroes, that's only one card in your deck. We've got a lot more that we're gonna have to be using to fill it out. So what are some other tips for general deck building? I'd say you want to have a good curve. If you get stuck with too many 4-cost cards or even like more expensive cards than that, it can be really hard to fill out your curve. I feel like 4-cost is the worst, where you can't play 2 of them until you hit 8 mana. So if you have a couple of these in your hand, they're going to be really hard to use. 3-cost is definitely a little bit better, but even if you have too many of those, you'll be pretty sad around like 5 mana. So oh yeah, I'm happy to see that Frog Prince too there. So yeah, I'd be looking for a pretty good curve. You'll want a lot of 2-drops and 3-drops. Those are the most important for sure. I think that some 1-drops can be good, but if they're not very powerful, you don't want to like have your hand have like too low resources. So you don't need a lot of 1-drops since they're pretty good, but definitely focus on like the 2-drops and the 3-drops, and then have like a couple really good 4 or 5 plus drops. I think that I actually do like having some pretty expensive cards in my deck just to help your resource game. Having an expensive card almost is like having a card that draws, because it just can kind of like keep more of your resources in your reserve in your hand. So I'm definitely not afraid to take some powerful high drop cards, but yeah, just be careful, do it in moderation. If all you have is like 5 and 6 drops in your hand, it's going to really limit your options on any given day. I think something else to be aware of is, especially early on in drafts, a lot of people aren't going to be building very good decks. I think a lot of your opponents might have some poorly built decks where they don't have good costs, or a lot of their cards are pretty situational. And so I think you can take advantage of that by having a good amount of Sabotage, or even things like Baku. I feel like these can be really strong, because if you take out like your opponent's strong card in their reserve, if they have a poor built deck without a lot of resources, they might have been relying on that more than they would in like a constructed format. And especially with things like Baku too, if your opponent only has 1 card in hand because they've built their deck poorly, you could just like absolutely decimate them by playing something like a Baku. So I don't think you need to always take every Sabotage you see, or like always pick Baku, but I think those are just things that can have a little bit of extra punch in a sealed format, so I definitely consider it. Something though that I think is basically necessary is having like at least some amount of removal in every deck. It's good to have a way to hit permanents and large characters, so things like Mana Reaping or Mana Eruption will be really good. There's some other options as well, even like Sticky Note Seals, while it doesn't hit low drops, can be like a good option. I think you want to have at least like 2 to 3 of these in your deck, just so that you can have an answer to like any crazy thing your opponent might do. If they drop something like Brassbug Hive Rare, it would be really nice to have a way to get rid of that. Similar if like Hydrocana comes down, or some other like big boss monster that has like a lingering presence, you're really gonna want to have that removal. A lot of times too, it can just like make your games like just so free. In my last draft, twice my opponent played 2 different opponents. They each played a Son of Yggdrasil, and I always had a 3-cost removal to take it out. And at that point, it was just like basically game winning on its own. So I feel like try and build your deck in a way with enough draw and enough like slightly expensive cards that you can have enough cards in your hand to always just hold on to that 1 removal until the perfect moment. And you'll definitely thank me for it when your opponent plays one of those really powerful cards and you have a way to answer it. So we want to run removal to be able to handle our opponent's big threats. But I also think that it can be good to have a couple bombs of your own. When you're drafting, you'll definitely want to take some high cost permanents that like have really strong effects. Things like the Ortis Bastion or Brassbug Hive are really good. Things like Hydrocana can be really strong as well. There's definitely like going to be some other just like really powerful bombs. Maybe even Sakurabru. That card isn't like a huge board presence, but it is just like an expensive and powerful one-time effect. But yeah, things like these will be really good, because your opponent might not be following these rules, and like there will be times where they won't have the removal. Not everyone's going to build a perfect deck with the exact right amount of removal, and not everyone's going to have like the freedom to have that extra card in their hand that they're saving for the right moment. So I think if you run some of these bombs, you can get away with a lot more easier than in Constructed. People will play their decks a lot over and over, and if they realize they have a problem dealing with big threats, they'll add something in to handle it. But I think in Limited, you might be able to catch someone off guard where they might not realize they have like a weakness in their deck, and if you can play a card that picks on that weakness, it can be just super beneficial. So yeah, I think definitely go for bombs. Even if they have specific good answers, it's a lot less likely your opponent's going to have those answers in a sealed format. Thinking about some other topics. So I have here, don't go for too specific of combos. I think that it's going to be, especially in draft, where you're not picking your deck all at once, but you're doing it like card by card. If you grab a card that's only good in a very specific situation, or with like one other card that you have in your deck and you have to draw them together for it to work, I just feel like that's a losing strategy. I think things like Brass Bug Hive that are really strong, it's going to give you, if it's the rare version, you'd get a 3/3/3 every day. That's going to be a lot better than something like the rare version of the Izmir Bastion. Because the Izmir Bastion, while it is strong to play that free spell, you're going to have a hard time finding enough powerful spells to make that worthwhile. So a lot of times you might play it and get like a strong spell played once, but then on like the next day you might not even have something to use with it. So yeah, something like the Izmir Bastion, I feel like that's just a little bit too specific, a little bit unlikely to have targets. Similarly, I mean, you can go for a festival build in draft, but if you only get one festival, you'll be pretty sad. So like maybe if you get two in the sealed version, you could go for it, but I don't know. Even so, you might end up with only like one sleep card or something. And so yeah, cards like that where you have to draw it with one other specific card in your deck to even have it work aren't my favorite. 1/2/1 for one from hand is not bad. Then looking at the reserve, if you control a token, up to one target character gains a sleep, you may have it gain 2 boosts. Honestly, I'm a fan of this card. I feel like it could fit pretty good in Waru. You'll always get that token if you have a Bureaucrat out, and then you can use it to re-sleep that Bureaucrat one more time. Since it is a reserve effect, it'll be a little bit less of a surprise, so your opponent can maybe like play around it a little bit. But even so, it's just such a strong effect. I feel like that this could be worth running, and you could always switch it up and surprise your opponent and use the sleep on their character instead. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that one, honestly. Alright, is this the golden booster right here? I have opened quite a bit of packs. I've opened a lot more packs than you've seen on the channel. So I'm very... This one, we don't get the tokens at the back, so we know it's not. But I'm very ready, I guess, to have the golden booster show up in one of my packs. So, what's the next tip? I think that you need to be careful with the types of cards you put in your deck, have a good balance. So we've got spells, characters, and permanents, right? I feel like you can never have too many characters. They're pretty much always good because you can just play them on your side to help you win. If your opponent plays something scary, you can kind of use you can use a removal on it, but you could even just play your own strong characters to beat it out essentially. So I feel like no matter what situation you're in, you'll almost always be happy to have characters. Maybe if you're staring down like a common Robin Hood, that'd be like the only time where specifically characters would be worse than other types of cards. But yeah, you'll definitely never have too many characters. On the other hand though, with permanents and spells, you'll really want to be careful when you're building your deck not to get too many of those. I think things like, yeah, the Mana Eruption, I'm saying they're really good just in case your opponent surprises you with like a strong Eternal character, a huge permanent, something like that, something gigantic. But I wouldn't want to have more than like 2 to 4 good removals in my deck. Maybe very specific heroes could get away with more, but I think that most heroes you're only going to want around 2 to 4 removal type spells, and maybe like 2 to 4 other types of cards like permanents or like spells like physical training that buff your characters. Maybe even, yeah, something like Hooked. You only probably want around, yeah, like a total of like 4 to 8 of these cards in your deck out of the 30. And with your hero, it might actually be like 29, right? So with a minimum of 30, I just feel like if you start to hit that territory where a third of your deck is only like spells or permanents, even like more, like if you get like half of your deck is only spells or permanents, it's really likely that you're gonna redraw a hand that only has spells and permanents, and you'll be pretty sad. Because when that happens, if you don't have like a lot of characters in your reserve or already in your hand, you could just get stuck in a position where you have only spells that need characters on the board to do anything, or like only permanents that you'll want to set up in the early game, but if you draw them in the late game, you'll basically just be conceding to Expedition. So yeah, be careful. Don't run too many. I'd almost consider like spells and permanents situational cards and just kind of weight them like that when you're building your deck. Try not to get too many of those, or it could come back to bite you. So those were most of my deck building tips that I had at least put in my notes. I'm sure that there are like other things to think about. You probably, if you have any of those ideas, just like throw them in the comments, share. We can kind of create like a list and a resource here of just good deck building tips. And so yeah, if you want to throw anything else in the comments, feel free. I guess one thing that's coming to mind right now, you might want a balance of cards that have all 3 stats versus cards that only have 2 or less. I think that cards like Bravo's Pathfinder are super good in the mid-game. Once you're out of the starting expeditions and you can wait to play it on a side where only those stats are relevant, I think that those skewed stats are actually like better a lot of times because you're getting higher values but in less stats. So if you use them at the right time, you'll get a better return. So those cards are super good. You will want them. Things like Frog Prince and whatnot, you're gonna want those, but when you're building your deck, make sure that like at least like a third of your characters have all 3 stats, just so that on the first day you're not giving up an expedition for free essentially. You'll really want to at least like trade with your opponent. You don't want to ever let him go 2-1 on you or something like that on the first day. So if you can have 1 or 2 not 1 or 2, but like if you can start the game with at least 1 character in your hand with all 3 stats, that'll be beneficial. So look for a couple of those when you're building your deck. But now let's jump into the gameplay and just talk about maybe some things to think about when you're actually in a match using this deck that you've created. So one of the things I would suggest first is to try and keep a balanced curve in your hand. Sometimes when I'm playing in Constructed, I'm pretty confident in my deck, and so I feel like you can get a little greedy and put stuff that you might want for future turns in the mana just because you know that you built your deck in a way where you'll draw into the cards you need. So for limited play though, it might not be true. You might not have a ton of good like 4 drops that you want for the next round, or you might have like the only 6 drop in your deck or something. You also just might draw the wrong combination of costs on the following day to fill out your mana. So I'd be a little bit more careful to keep a balanced curve in your hand of kind of like plan out your next couple turns if possible. Sometimes you're gonna not be able to stick to this, but when possible, I'd just be careful to keep a balanced curve unless you like know the costs in your deck are gonna be really forgiving and that you'll likely draw into 2 drops and 3 drops and stuff. Just like be careful when you're playing. We've already mentioned this with deck building, but you're going to want to hold on to those removal cards. Optimally, you would never want to use like your big removal, like a Mana Eruption, on just like a normal 4-drop or something. If you're getting rid of your opponent's Croupier with your Eruption, and then a couple turns later they play one of those big permanents, they drop the Son of Yggdrasil on you, or something like a Brassbug Hive, the Ortis. Oh baby, I was getting distracted by the foil, sorry. We'll come back to that thought, but first let's look at this Sneezer Shroom. Alright, 2/2 for 1 from the hand. Oh wow, sorry, I'm just so distracted by this art. Let's see if I can get this up here a little better. He has so many fun little critter friends in this version. When I think if you haven't like paid too much attention to the Kickstarter art, he basically just has like more mushrooms showing up on his head and like more little friends just showing up around him for each of the upgrades, basically from common to rare to unique. Alright, from the reserve, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, I gain anchored. Not the craziest effect. I'm a little bit disappointed. I love the ones that can either anchor something else or draw cards or things like that, but it is pretty good stats from hand, so you could definitely surprise people with that. Have this be like a really cheap plant you could play that still has good stats before dropping something like Youngsu. From the support ability, we get, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. Nothing crazy there either, but you could set up something like a Muna Caregiver or Muna Druid. Yeah, there we go. That card was so popular and common. Here, let me get a sleeve for this. I feel like Muna Druid was such a frequently used card in Exalted and things before we had the full set. I feel like it'll still see play now, but yeah, it's definitely been slightly outclassed by some of the new support. I feel like a lot of times now on day one, you just want to play something like a Dracana instead. We were talking about gameplay and that you want to hold those removals. So I think that is true. Try and not waste them on small threats. Be really like purposeful when you use those. And on the other hand, be a little greedy when you're playing. Just like with some of the other things we've mentioned before. Oh, I think this is my third Sneezer Shroom rare, so happy to see that. If your opponent doesn't have a perfect deck, or if they're making some misplays, especially early on at like a release event, they're probably not going to have an answer to everything in their hand. There's no way that new opponents are going to have a Sabotage and a removal spell for low and high cost characters and like everything that they could need in their hand every time. So I feel like you can get away with playing expensive like 5 drops and just banking on the fact that they don't have a removal, especially if you have multiple high cost cards. Like if you want to play a Hydra, play that 5 drop out early, be greedy. If they don't have the removal, you'll just get so much value out of that. And even if they do, at least now you've gotten rid of that card, so you won't be seeing it again. It's just very unlikely that people are going to be able to punish you in a sealed format. You do need to be mildly careful. If you have a way to win the game with normal methods on like at the end, you definitely don't need to play your huge expensive permanent on the last day of the game if you have enough characters to win through normal means. But especially in the mid game, while you still have a lot of time to catch up, even if your opponent does get a favorable trade into you, I feel like you can play those powerful cards that have specific answers and just kind of test your opponent to see if they have it. Also, I feel like in Constructed, a lot of times we'll play the smallest card first, something that's like a 1 cost, 1/1/1. You're going to want to lead out with that to slow play your turn. We've been mentioning this card a lot. Look out for those. Really good in sealed formats. Super rare, but if you get it, it would be nice to have. Even something like Kappa, not a bad threat there. So yeah, in Constructed, a lot of times we're going to be pretty specific with how we order our turns. You'll want to play the 1 drop first so that you can see what your opponent does before committing a bigger card. Getting that second unique foiler here. I feel like you don't have to do that always in sealed. People aren't always going to be able to play 2 or 3 cards in a turn in a day. Normally you can build your deck with like a lot of draw and a lot of low cost cards, but you're not always going to be able to pull that off in a sealed format. And so I think sometimes if you have like a 1 drop and a 5 drop, you can play the 1 drop first and then follow it up with your 5 drop. But if you know you're playing that 5 drop no matter what, and you don't really think that your opponent is gonna like play into it or something and make a mistake, you could probably just lead out with the 5 drop. It's a lot less likely that people are gonna have like the perfect answer or be able to really like take advantage of misordering and stuff. And so the reason I would say to lead out with the 5 drop is if it's strong enough to win you an expedition, maybe you don't even have to play your 1 drop and conserve it. So that's the main thing I'm trying to suggest here is you can probably get away with playing a big card and hold on to your resources instead of using the normal strategies of starting with the smallest thing and working up to the biggest thing. Just because in this, like, resources are going to be a lot more important, especially if you don't get the exact card you're looking for. If you don't have a lot of draw, maybe you just want to hold on to that 1 cost card until later when it's a little bit more important. So yeah, just be careful and like think about it. Are you really getting enough value from leading with your 1 drop? or is it a little unnecessary and the other cards you're going to play this round would be enough, so you can just save that one drop for later. And I think one last gameplay tip is really try not to get behind. I feel like in Constructed, you can build your deck to have powerful combos and crazy setup turns that lead to like ridiculous results later on. Your deck's going to be a lot more close to a starter deck when you're playing in a sealed version, especially if you're doing the version where you get 3 packs in a starter deck. You're basically just playing a starter deck at that point. And so, while it might be possible to 2-0 your opponent in the late game with the right combination of cards, I think that it's much more beneficial to just try and get a lead early on, and then all you have to do is go 1-1 with your opponent for the rest of the game to win. Because if both of you are working with a lot of like mediocre cards like this, things without effects, just normal stats, it's going to be pretty hard to do so much more than your opponent that you can take both sides on them. So while it's not impossible, I think that it's more of a big deal to just have that 1-0 lead over your opponent in sealed than it is in constructed play. I think a lot of decks kind of expect to get behind like Waru early, but then they make up for it later. But if you don't have like crazy stuff in your deck with what you've been able to draft, you'll probably just want to play it a little safer and just really value keeping up with your opponent and having like the same score as them or better early on, just to make the end of the game easier. You don't know what you're going to draw. Maybe you'll draw the best cards in your deck, maybe you'll draw the worst ones. You'll have a lot more worse cards than you would in constructed, so yeah, I definitely just try and get those early leads. So outside of gameplay in your deck, now let's go into some of the differences between the sealed play and the draft. So in draft, you're going to be picking the cards from a pack. You're going to open 4 of them like this. If you have the retail packs, you're going to have 1 less playable card in it too, so you'll have to think about that a little bit. It's not a huge deal, but you can be a little bit more picky we can be a little more picky with the Kickstarter because you'll get some extra cards. You can do cute things like taking stuff that your opponent might want and what a little more often because you'll have 4 more cards to work with. But anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. But basically, you're gonna go through these cards and find the best one, pass it to your opponent, and then just keep doing that over and over. Depending on how many people you're drafting with, if it's like 4 or 8, you could see the same packs multiple times. If you have like 10 people, you're only going to see maybe like the first pack again. So let's look at this Ozma quick. If you control 3 or more characters, you may discard target permanent. Okay. A 3-cost permanent removal, not locked into 4 or more costing permanents or low-cost permanents, so that's nice. When I go to reserve from the Expedition Zone, if you have less than 8 mana orbs, draw a card. Let's go. This is pretty huge, honestly. I feel like I've gotten a lot of Ordis Uniques, but yeah, Ozma is a very good card. You might just want to run it in the common, and you might not really be able to upgrade it because it's just such a strong common that you lose a lot when you replace it. But looking at this, if decks with permanents are common, you're gonna really like this. You get to put a body on the board while removing a permanent, and you'll get at least 1 draw. There's not really a way to remove fleeting, and it only gets the draw when it goes to reserve, so you'll pretty much only get it 1 time even though you play this twice. But yeah, removing 2 permanents, getting a draw, I like that card a lot. So speaking of uniques, when you're drafting, you do want to win. You do want to have the best deck possible, but it's also nice you get to keep the cards that you pull. So I'd probably always take the unique. Even if it's a bad unique, it's just worth so much more than most commons and rares are going to be that I just take it so you can trade it later for something you want. Even if you don't want to play it in your deck. The last time I drafted, I got this, I think it was a Sneezer Shroom. No, it was a Tiny Djinn. I got a Tiny Djinn from Muna, and it was close to unplayable. I don't know. It was alright. I didn't use it in my deck, but I just grabbed it first pick because I just wanted to make sure I got the unique. So yeah, the uniques are pretty rare. Even if you take the first one you get every time, that'll probably just be 1 the whole drafting experience. So yeah, I'd always snatch those up. You don't have to if you see something you really want that's perfect for your deck. Like if you have Sigismar and you see the Ordis Bastion, maybe you can take that if you think the unique is like definitely unplayable. But in most circumstances, I feel like you can get away with just snatching up all the uniques. So what else helps? I think that it is important to know the set and know common synergies. If you are pretty aware of what cards are available, it'll make it a lot easier to rate the cards that are in your pack. So before you go, especially before the releases event, just look at some cards, get an idea of what you should expect out of a 2-drop, what you should expect out of a 3-drop, and just kind of, figure out what an average card looks like, so that when you get one that's really good, like this right here, just barely under the stats of a normal card for 2 costs, but you can draw a card both times it's played. Seems pretty good to me. Maybe it won't work in all decks, but especially if you can get something like Kojo or Sigismar, it could be pretty easy to activate that. But yeah, once you know the set, it'll just make it a lot easier for you to value your cards properly when you're picking what to take. And things like bureaucrats, you'll want to know some of the common stuff, like bureaucrats work with war, you can put them to sleep to have their effects for 2 days. You want to know, like, Lindua is great for sabotage cards, so that you can get some stats on the board with the Ma token, even though you're removing a follower. You want to know some of that stuff, so that if you get past cards that are really great for these types of combos, you can recognize to like take those things together. You'll want to know what the heroes all do, so that you can figure out which one fits your strategy best. Something like Sierra might not be great, but if you get the right cards for it, like Ortis Carrier, you'll want to realize to grab Sierra to go with that. So do your best to look at the set. That's probably like step 2. First, I would just know like the average strength per cost of like cards in the set, just do like some general browsing. But if you have enough time, I would try and get to know all the cards in the set too. Not a bad pickup. I feel like people have been selling these for like 10 to 15 euros even right now. That's like even more in the US, maybe like $17 or something. Yeah, pretty popular card from this set here, so never sad to see another one of these in the alt art. For your colors, you get to pick 3 of them, so 3 out of 6. I think that's pretty generous. Is this golden booster right here? Nope, just 1. Alright. But yeah, I would not try and lock in all 3 colors right away. Maybe like pick 2 early on, and then kind of wait and see what you want for your 3rd color. Also be open to shifting, even if you've started pulling cards for all 3 colors. You only need 29 cards and a hero in your colors, and so you can get like 10 or more cards, I think, that you don't have to run in your deck. Let's see, if you have the 13 cards from the Kickstarter that are playable, that'll be like 52 cards, and you only need to keep 29. That's for a draft. In sealed, this doesn't really apply, but yeah, for a draft, you can take a lot of cards that aren't in your color. So don't feel like you need to lock in on the first three colors you choose and never pick something else. Ortis Cadets, definitely the Ortis box here. Let's see, we got, you may put a card from your hand in reserve. If you do, create an Ortis 1/1/1 soldier token in my expedition. It is nice that this costs 1 from reserve. That's probably like the saving grace to make this maybe somewhat playable, but yeah, the normal one doesn't have the extra cost, so the only time I'd really see you playing this is if you're running a deck that has cards that want to be in the reserve. This could maybe be a way to activate those and just get some pretty good stats for 1 the second time it's played. So yeah, be open on your colors. You only need like 2 to 3 cards for some of your colors. If in one of the decks I made recently, basically my whole deck, it was just Bravos and Ortis cards, and then I had 3 Muna cards, and they were like a removal and Hydrocana and maybe just like Daughter of Yggdrasil or something. So I just took the absolute most powerful Muna cards I got and put them into what was basically just a Bravos and Ortis deck. And you can do that a lot. If you get like a really good removal spell for Izmir or Lyra, you might not be picking up a lot of Izmir or Lyra cards, but maybe just like the 1 or 2 removal spells you get are so good that you can justify having that be your 3rd color, and then have your other 2 colors, like you'll get plenty of cards from those to be able to just fill out the deck. Especially in the late game, if you just see like 1 or 2 really good cards of a color, or you notice, this is something you can do in draft, you'll want to pay attention to the cards that are being passed to you. Each pack is supposed to have at least 1 card of every color. Most of the time it'll have close to 2 of each. So if you notice that nobody's ever taken the Lyra cards, or you notice that like there's a lot of Izmir, a lot of Axiom cards coming to you, in the late game you can probably shift to one of those colors and know that you'll get 1 or 2 really good bombs from that faction because nobody else is trying to pick them up. And so yeah, doing something like that at the end could just get you like 3 or 4 really good cards to pair with 2 of the colors you've been picking already. So look at the cards that are being passed to you. You can get an idea for what your opponents are putting in their decks. I wouldn't think too much about this, especially early on, but I'd mostly just like try and keep track of like the colors you're seeing the most, and you can get a little bit more sweaty with it later on, and you can really try and like think what your opponents are going to have in their deck and be planning ahead. But mostly I would just try and figure out what colors aren't being picked and either try and pick those up yourself because it'll be easy to get good cards from them. Or on the other hand, if you get like a really good card for one of the colors you know everyone's taking, you can just hold on to that so that it's not in somebody else's deck. I think you have the space, like we were saying, to get a couple of cards you're not going to use. So yeah, definitely don't feel bad about taking just like a strong rare or something that's not in your color just to mess somebody else up. So just trying to look at my points here and see, we've got only about 4 packs left, so the last 3, now that we've already seen this one get spoiled, one of them's the golden booster. We're sure of it. Let's see. So take the cards that other people want. See what's coming to you. You only need 2 to 3 cards of some colors. I think there's a very low cost to running cards that aren't in like your main colors. In another game, you might need the right resources to pay for that extra color, but in Altered, where you can use any card as a resource for any color, there's almost no cost to adding a 3rd color into your deck. So I'm almost always going to be running 3 colors. I don't think I would ever honestly not run 3 colors. It'd have to be like a very crazy draft for me to not be putting 3 colors in my deck, because even if you just put the one best card from one color in your deck, it's still worth it for that last spot over like the worst card of one of the other 2 colors that you have. For sealed, you can also just like at the beginning, what I would do is I'd sort the cards by color, and then I would make one pile of the amazing cards that I'm definitely running for each color, and then a second pile of like the playable cards, and maybe the 3rd pile is the ones I definitely don't want to run. And then you can just kind of start looking at the numbers and see whichever pile has the most cards that are amazing that you definitely want to run, probably you're putting that into your deck. And then you can start to get an idea of how many amazing and playable cards do I have for that color, so how many cards do I need left. If you've already filled out most of your deck, maybe you can be a little bit more picky and just take some pretty good rares there. You can be a little bit more picky and just take one of the colors that has like 4 really amazing cards, even though there's no playables. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically, if you separate all of the colors and you get an idea of how many cards you want to play for each, if between, say, Izmir and Axiom, let's say that you really want to play those 2, if you already have 28 cards that you think are like either amazing or playable, you can pretty much put any 3rd color in your deck at that point, and I would just look for like which one has the most amazing cards. On the other hand though, if at that point you feel like, oh, I have like 10 more spots to fill, maybe you can't take the 3rd color that only has 1 or 2 good cards, and you'd have to take one that has a larger amount of playable cards. So that's something you can think about. We're on the 2nd to last pack here. Was my hunch wrong? We're about to find out. Whew. Thank you all for watching my TED Talk. I hope that you're prepared to take down your organized play this weekend. I hope that you can have some fun at the release event, and that the tips that I've shared help you take the dub there. Share your stories after you go. Let me know in the comments. Did my tips help out? Share your comments. Will I get the golden booster right now? Let me know. So this is the last pack. Okay. 1 token. Dreams crushed. Let's see though if we can end on a unique. We got the Sneezer Shroom Alt Art. No promos though. It'd be nice to get a promo. In most of the displays I've opened, I think I've only gotten like 1 promo in like 5 displays or something so far. Let's see. Tasia Nora. Alright. Mighty Jin. Keelon Burst. Esmeralda. All playable so far. Mowgli. Maybe breaking the trend. Asmodeus. Open the Gates. Magical Training. Ozma.
Oh, interesting. Getting the Lyra Common and Bravos Rare Asmodeus in the same pack. Lyra Thespian, not bad. Tooth Fairy. Alright. Is it a unique? Ooh, okay. Ending on a strong note. Let's see what we got. Monolith Legate. 3 costs from hand, 2 costs from reserve. 0/3/3 stats. Alright. Kind of in the middle for that. Let's see. From the hand, if you control 1 or more landmarks, the next spell you play this afternoon costs 1 less. When my expedition fails to move forward during dusk, after rest, Sabotage. Yeah, I don't know. I think we whiffed a little bit with this one. You can tell me what you think. Essentially, if you always get the combo off by having a spell to follow it, it's just a 2 cost from hand. And the stats here are fine, but a 0/3/3 is the same as like Frog Prince and Pathfinder and some of those other cards. So I feel like that you're getting a fair amount of value from this. Maybe it's slightly better than the rare version in Ysmir, but I don't know if this is the type of card I'd want to spend my unique slot on, but you can tell me. It's been a ton of fun, yeah, making this video, doing some research. I had a great time playing in some drafts at Gen Con. You can look at one of my previous videos where I talk all about Gen Con and share about some specific drafts that I got to participate in. I won this playmat there, actually, so yeah, this is a fruit of me competing in some drafts, and I'm excited to take down my locals too. If you have watched this and are prepared and see me there, yeah, see if you can mess me up. I'm excited for the challenge, but thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments, yeah, what you think about these tips. If you have any others that you want to share with people who are trying to get ready for a draft or a sealed event. I didn't talk a ton about starter decks, but if your event does like the specific type of sealed where they give you 3 packs and a starter deck, I'd probably recommend taking the Orda starter deck. It is one of the most powerful. I think though that the Tasia starter deck could be pretty good as well. And honestly, you can pretty much at that point play any of the ones that you want. I think that those are probably like my first and second pick, but other than that, just play the one you want to play. You'll get 3 packs to make it better. Who knows what crazy cards you'll get. I have mentioned recently that I'm going to be going to the Gamers Guild tournament in October. I want to find some pretty good uniques for my deck so that I can really just be playing the most optimal list. So I'm going to make a post about this, or I might have already made it at the time of this video. Look out for that. I'll be wanting to trade a lot of the uniques that I've been pulling, as well as like commons and rare cards, or even just like buying uniques in cash. And so yeah, look at my post, see what type of stuff I'm looking for. If you have it, I'd love to trade with you. And if there's anything you see in my videos that you want to get your hands on, feel free to reach out in the comments or respond to my post and things. I'd love to make some trades. Thank you so much for watching. I can't believe the official release of Altered is almost here. Now I gotta get going. I've got some cards to scan.